The iron gates of Blackwood Manor groaned as the police cruisers pushed through. Red and blue lights flashed across the rain-streaked windows, painting streaks of colour on the panicked faces of my family. My mother, her designer coat now soaked and clinging to her, shot a look of pure hatred in my direction. My father, always so proud, looked small and defeated in handcuffs. And my brother, Daniel, the golden child, just looked confused, as if this was all a terrible mistake that would be cleared up in a moment. He still believed he was untouchable. They thought this was about the money they had systematically stolen from the family business, the fortune they built while leaving me with nothing. They had no idea their arrest had nothing to do with financial crimes and everything to do with what was still inside that house. It wasn't about what they took, it was about who they abandoned. You might be wondering why I'd go to such lengths to destroy my own family. To understand that, you have to understand the deal they made with me 10 years ago, right here on this very lawn. It started, as all my problems did, with my brother. Daniel had been accepted into a prestigious university, and my parents decided to move across the country to be near him, to build a new life befitting the family of such a promising young man. They bought a new house, enrolled in the local country club, and planned a future that was bright, shiny, and perfect. A future that didn't include me. "We have a very important job for you, Mark," my father had said, his voice laced with that false sincerity he used when he wanted me to do something I wouldn't like. He gestured to the sprawling Gothic mansion behind him, Blackwood Manor. It was an old family property, inherited decades ago, too remote and run down to sell. "We need someone we can trust to look after the old place, keep it from falling apart completely." My mother nodded eagerly. "It's a huge responsibility, a real sign of our faith in you." They framed it as an honour, but I saw it for what it was, a cage. They were exiling their failure of a son, the quiet, awkward scapegoat, so he wouldn't tarnish their perfect new life. I agreed. I had no choice. They promised to send money for upkeep and my living expenses. That was the first promise they broke. The first few months were a lesson in absolute silence. The grand, decaying halls of Blackwood Manor swallowed every sound. My footsteps echoed in the dust-filled air, a lonely rhythm in a house that felt like a tomb. The money my father promised never came. My weekly calls to my mother went from being answered with strained pleasantries to going straight to voicemail. "We're just so busy setting things up here, Mark," she'd said the last time we spoke. "Daniel is thriving. You wouldn't believe it." I did believe it. His success was the only currency they ever cared about. Soon, the electricity was cut off. Then the water. I was 20 years old, completely alone, in a crumbling mansion with no money and no one to call. For the first time, the true depth of their betrayal settled in. This wasn't just neglect, it was a deliberate act of abandonment. They hadn't just exiled me, they had left me here to waste away, out of sight and out of mind. The anger that kindled in my chest then was a cold, slow-burning thing. It kept me warm during the nights I spent huddled in blankets, listening to the wind howl through the broken panes of glass. I had to survive. I found old oil lamps in the basement and a supply of kerosene that I rationed carefully. I learned to patch the leaking roof with tar I found in the carriage house. I discovered my great-grandfather's old library and read books on horticulture, planting a small, desperate garden in the overgrown courtyard. I learned to set snares in the surrounding woods, catching rabbits and squirrels for food. The soft, privileged boy my parents had disdained was gone, burned away by necessity. In his place was someone harder, quieter, and far more observant. It was during one of my scavenging trips inside the house itself that I first realized something was wrong. I was in the West Wing, a section of the manor that had been closed off for half a century, looking for old furniture to break down for firewood. I was prying the boards off a sealed doorway when I heard it. A faint, rhythmic scratching sound from the floor above me. I froze, every sense on high alert. It wasn't a rat. I knew their sounds intimately. This was different. Slower, more deliberate. I called out, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Is anyone there?" The only answer was the sudden, complete silence from upstairs. The scratching stopped. I stood there for a long time, the cold of the room seeping into my bones, and I understood. The house wasn't just empty. I wasn't alone. Fear is a luxury I could no longer afford. The boy who would have run and hidden from a strange noise was long gone. I gripped the iron pry bar I'd been using, its weight a cold comfort in my hand, and made my way to the grand staircase of the West Wing. Each step I took was deliberate. If someone was in this house with me, I needed to know who they were and what they wanted. Panic was a liability. The second-floor hallway was a tunnel of shadows, pierced by thin slivers of moonlight from the grimy windows. Dust hung in the air like a shroud. I moved slowly, listening, my eyes scanning the row of closed doors. Most were standard, with tarnished brass knobs. But the very last door at the end of the hall was different. It was made of heavy oak, reinforced with iron straps, and it had no knob. Instead, there was a thick, heavy slide bolt, rusted and imposing, fixed to the outside of the door. It wasn't designed to keep people out. It was designed to keep something, or someone, in. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. The scratching had come from behind this door. Using the hooked end of the pry bar, I wedged it between the bolt and the frame and pushed. The rusted metal screeched in protest, the sound echoing through the empty manor like a scream. With a final groaning snap, the bolt broke free. The door swung inward into perfect darkness. I used my foot to push it fully open and waited, letting my eyes adjust. The room smelled of stale air, dust, and something else. A faint human scent of long-term confinement. I stepped inside. On the floor was a thin, filthy mattress. In the corner, a small, neat stack of empty, old-fashioned cans of peaches and beans. But it was the far wall that drew my attention. It was covered in scratches. Thousands upon thousands of hash marks, grouped in sevens, a desperate calendar of lost time, and there, carved into the plaster beneath the endless tally of days, was a single name, Eliza. The name struck me like a physical blow. Eliza, my great-aunt, my grandmother's younger sister. The story I'd always been told was that she was unwell and had been sent to a private care facility decades ago, long before I was born. A comfortable place, they'd said, where she could be looked after. They lied. There was no facility. There was only this room. My family hadn't just inherited a house. They had inherited a prisoner, and now they had made me her unwitting jailer. The air in the room was thick with the history of my family's cruelty. Generations of lies, all to hide this one terrible secret. My own abandonment suddenly felt like a small, pathetic echo of a much deeper evil. They hadn't just thrown me away, they had made me a cog in their monstrous machine. The anger I felt was no longer just for myself, it was for her, for Eliza. The scratching I'd heard meant she was still here, somewhere within these walls, hiding. Finding her became my only purpose. I started with the house's original blueprints, which I found in a dusty folio in the library. I spent days studying them, cross-referencing them with the manor's actual layout. The house was a labyrinth, and I soon discovered it was even more complex than it appeared. There were inconsistencies, walls that were thicker than they should be, chimneys with no corresponding fireplaces, entire sections of floor space that were simply unaccounted for. The old house wasn't just built, it was engineered to conceal.
Behind a heavy bookcase in the library, I found the first one, a narrow, tight doorway leading into a network of service passages that snaked through the walls. They were dark, cobweb-filled tunnels, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. This was how she moved, a ghost in the bones of the manor. I followed them for hours, discovering small signs of her passage, a recently disturbed patch of dust, a small nook with a few tattered blankets, the faint scent of the soap I used. She had been watching me. She knew my routines. She had likely been taking small amounts of my food and supplies for months. I realized then that she must be terrified of me. To her, I was just the newest warden, another family member sent to keep her locked away. Chasing her through the hidden passages would only drive her deeper into hiding. I had to change my approach. I had to show her I was not her enemy. That night, I placed a plate with a cooked rabbit and some vegetables from my garden on a small table outside her old room. Next to it, I left a full canteen of fresh water and a new candle. I didn't try to wait or watch. I just spoke into the silent hallway. "My name is Mark," I said, my voice steady. "They abandoned me here just like they abandoned you. I'm not going to hurt you. This food is for you." I felt foolish talking to an empty corridor, but I had to try. Then I walked away, leaving her to her decision. The next morning when I returned, my heart was pounding. The table was just as I had left it, but the plate was empty and the water was gone. This became our silent ritual. Every evening I would leave a plate of food, and every morning I would find the plate wiped clean. For weeks this was the extent of our interaction. It was a fragile thread of trust, woven in the quiet darkness of the manor, and I was careful not to break it. I never tried to wait for her, never tried to catch her in the act. I simply provided, and she accepted. It was enough. We were two ghosts in the same house, acknowledging each other's existence. Then, one afternoon, I caught a glimpse. I had just set the plate down at the end of the hall and had turned to walk away. A floorboard creaked behind me. I hesitated, then slowly glanced over my shoulder. From a darkened doorway I had never noticed before, a pale, thin hand darted out, wrapped itself around the edge of the plate, and pulled it back into the shadows. It was gone in an instant. I didn't say a word. I just kept walking, a strange sense of victory warming my chest. She was getting closer. A few days later, the silence was finally broken. As I set down a bowl of stew, a voice, raspy and dry from years of disuse, whispered from the darkness, "Why?" I froze, my back to the sound. I fought the urge to turn around. "Why? What?" I asked, my own voice quiet. "Why are you kind?" the voice asked. I took a slow breath. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind by them," I said. "My name is Mark. I'm your great-nephew. They told me I was coming here to act as a caretaker for an old house. They didn't tell me there was anyone in it. They abandoned me here. No money, no contact. Just like they did to you." I told her everything then, about my brother Daniel, the golden child. About being the family scapegoat, the disappointment they had to hide away so they could build their perfect life. I spoke of my anger, my loneliness, and the cold realization that I meant nothing to them. There was a long, heavy silence from the dark hallway. I thought perhaps I had said too much, that I had scared her away for good. Then, I heard a faint click, the sound of a small latch being undone. I turned. Slowly. A section of the wall paneling was swinging inward, revealing a hidden door. A woman emerged from the passage, blinking in the dim light. She was painfully thin, her hair long and white, her skin almost translucent, but her eyes, though wary, were sharp and fiercely intelligent. She was not the madwoman my family had described. She was a prisoner who had endured. "My name is Eliza," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "And you're wrong about one thing. They told me you were coming. They said you were to be my new guard." Her words hung in the air, a final, damning confirmation of our family's bottomless cruelty. They hadn't just left me to rot. They had tried to poison me against the only other person who could understand. They had tried to make me an instrument of her suffering. We stood there for a long moment, 2 generations of family scapegoats, finally seeing the full ugly picture of the people who had created us. We retreated to the library, the first room Eliza had set foot in outside of her prison and the hidden passages in over 40 years. We sat in the dusty armchairs, and she told me her story. It wasn't a tale of mental instability, but one of sharp intelligence and courage. As a young woman, she had discovered that her brother, my grandfather, was systematically stealing from their father's business. She confronted him, threatening to expose him. So he, with the help of my grandmother, orchestrated her downfall. They paid a crooked doctor to declare her mentally unfit and a corrupt judge to sign the committal papers. They told her fiancé she ran off, and told the world she was too unwell to be seen. Then, they locked her away in the West Wing and seized her considerable inheritance, which became the seed money for the fortune my parents now flaunted. For decades, a groundskeeper was paid handsomely to bring her food and supplies once a week, ensuring the secret was kept. He wasn't a cruel man, Eliza said, her voice devoid of emotion. Just a loyal one. He died of a heart attack about a year ago. That's when my parents had come. They had stood outside her door just as I had, and told her the old guard was gone. But a new one is coming, my mother had said through the door. Another family disappointment. He'll keep you in line. Listening to her, I saw the pattern repeating itself. My grandfather and Eliza, my father and me. And now, my brother Daniel, the golden child, poised to inherit it all, built on a foundation of lies and human suffering. The anger in me settled into a cold, hard resolve. Eliza must have seen the change in my face. She stood up, her frail form seeming to draw strength from her indignation. "Grief is a useless emotion, Mark," she said, her voice like steel. "They stole my youth. They tried to steal your future. We will not let them rest on our ruins. We will take it all back." She walked, with a newfound purpose, to the manor's study, a room I had barely entered. She ran her hand along the wood-paneled wall, pressing a specific spot. With a low groan, a panel slid aside, revealing a small, black iron safe. "Our grandfather never trusted his own son," she whispered. "He kept the real books here, the original deed to this house, the true company ledgers, and his actual last will and testament. They think they own everything. They own nothing." "The combination is a date," Eliza said, tracing the cold iron of the dial with a slender finger. "The day my father gave me my horse Stardust. He said it was the happiest day of his life." She looked away, her expression clouded. "But it was so long ago, I can't recall the exact numbers." Decades of trauma had buried the memory. While Eliza's mind was a fortress of secrets about the house, mine was practical, forged by a year of solving problems. "Your father was a meticulous man, wasn't he?" I asked. He wrote things down. I went back to the library, to a dusty shelf of old leather-bound photo albums I'd ignored until now. I started with the albums from her childhood, flipping through page after page of faded black and white photographs. And then I found it, a picture of a beaming young Eliza, no older than 10, sitting atop a small, proud-looking horse. On the back, in my great-grandfather's elegant script, were the words, "Eliza and Stardust, the 10th of June, 1958, a day of joy." I returned to the study, and, with Eliza watching, I carefully turned the dial, right to 06, left to 10, right to 58. The lock clicked, a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. I pulled the heavy door open. Inside, untouched for over 60 years, was a stack of leather-bound ledgers and a bundle of documents tied with a faded ribbon. We spread them out on the great desk. The evidence was more damning than we could have imagined. There was the true last will, clear as day, leaving Blackwood Manor and a third of the family company shares directly to my beloved daughter, Eliza. There was a secret ledger, kept in our great-grandfather's own hand, detailing every dollar his son had siphoned away, with sharp, angry notes in the margins. And at the very bottom, the most powerful weapon of all, a signed, notarized confession from the doctor who had declared Eliza mentally incompetent, stating he had done so under duress and in exchange for a substantial payment from my grandfather. Eliza stared at the papers, her hands flat on the desk. "They built an empire on a mountain of lies," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "And we are going to use the truth to bring it all crashing down." That night, we began to plan. Eliza, it turned out, had a mind for strategy as sharp as a razor. She had spent 40 years thinking. She laid out the phases of our war. "First," she declared, "we need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. We need a shark, someone who specializes in high-stakes probate and corporate fraud." "A shark like that will cost a fortune," I said, the reality of our situation setting in. "We have nothing." For the first time since I met her, Eliza smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a blade. "My mother always told me a woman needs her own escape fund," she said. She led me not to her prison, but to the bedroom she had used as a girl, a room frozen in time. She knelt and pried up a floorboard beneath an old vanity. Reaching into the dark space, she pulled out a dusty velvet pouch. She emptied its contents onto the bed, a cascade of old gold coins, and a magnificent string of pearls tumbled out. "They took her daughter," Eliza said softly. "But they never found her money. We had our war chest. The hunt was about to begin." The first trip back to civilization felt like stepping onto another planet. After a year of silence and solitude, the noise of a small town was a physical assault. Cars, voices, music, it was a chaotic symphony that made my teeth ache. I sold the gold coins first, to a collector who barely blinked, his scales and calculations swift and professional. The pearls were harder. I walked into a high-end jewelry shop looking like a ghost, thin and pale, with clothes that were a year out of date. The jeweler's eyes were full of suspicion. "Where did you get these?" he asked, holding the pearls up to the light. I channeled the cold resolve I had learned from Eliza. "They were my great-grandmother's," I said calmly, my voice steady. "They are natural saltwater pearls from the late 1942nd. The clasp is platinum. I know their value. The question is, do you?" My directness, my refusal to be intimidated, threw him off. He examined them again, his professional curiosity overriding his suspicion. An hour later, I walked out with a certified check for an amount that made my hands tremble. I deposited the check, bought a simple suit, a new phone, and a bus ticket to the city. Eliza had given me a name, Arthur Croft, the son of the lawyer her father had trusted. He was now a senior partner at a top corporate law firm. Getting the meeting wasn't easy, but I used the weight of the money I now possessed, presenting myself as a representative for a private client with a significant probate issue. It worked. 2 days later, I was sitting in a leather chair opposite a man in his 70s with eyes as sharp as shards of glass. Arthur Croft listened to my story without a single change in his expression. When I finished, he steepled his fingers and stared at me. "It's a compelling narrative, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice dry. "But it is also an extraordinary and unsubstantiated claim, ideal in facts and evidence, not family folklore." I had anticipated this. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single, crisp copy of the document we had made. I slid it across the vast mahogany desk. "This is a copy of a notarized confession signed by Dr. Alistair Finch in 1959, attesting to the fact that he was paid by my grandfather to fraudulently declare my great-aunt Eliza Vance incompetent." Croft picked up the paper. The silence in the room was absolute as he read it. His mask of professional boredom didn't just crack, it disintegrated. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw the predator Eliza had spoken of. A hungry, calculating light shone in his eyes. "My God," he breathed. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. "Where is your great-aunt?" "She's safe," I replied, "and she's ready to reclaim her life." A slow, wolfish grin spread across Arthur Croft's face. "Young man," he said, pushing a contract across the desk, "I am going to take this case, and we are going to burn their entire world to the ground." The weeks that followed were a quiet storm. While Mr. Croft and his team of legal assassins worked in the city, I worked at the manor. With the money from the sale of the pearls, I brought Blackwood back to life. The first victory was the hum of electricity returning to the house, pushing back the oppressive shadows. Then came the rush of clean water through the pipes. I bought food, real food, fresh and plentiful. I hired a discreet crew to repair the roof and replace the broken windows. Most importantly, I cared for Eliza. I bought her new clothes, soft and warm. I filled the grand bathtub with hot water and bubbles, a luxury she hadn't known in 40 years. We ate our meals together in the formal dining room, the two of us seated at the head of a table that could hold 30. For the first time, the house felt less like a prison and more like a fortress. Our fortress. We were two ghosts no longer. We were the rightful masters of the house, preparing for war. All the while, my family lived in blissful ignorance, celebrating Daniel's latest academic award and planning a lavish European vacation. The first tremor hit their perfect world on a Tuesday. Mr. Croft had filed the ex parte motion. A judge, after reviewing the doctor's confession and the original will, had agreed to freeze every known asset belonging to my parents and my brother, pending a full hearing. The order was executed silently and simultaneously across a dozen financial institutions. The first I heard of it was a frantic, furious phone call from my mother. I was in the garden with Eliza, showing her the new vegetable sprouts, when my phone rang. I answered and put it on speaker. "Mark, what in God's name have you done?" she shrieked, her voice tight with panic and rage. My cards were just declined at Chanel. Your father tried to talk to our broker and they told him our accounts are under a court-ordered freeze. It's all tied to the manor's property title. What did you do?" I let her finish, her accusations echoing in the quiet afternoon air. Eliza looked at me, her expression unreadable but for the cold fire in her eyes. I held the phone up. "It's not what I did, Mother," I said, my voice calm and even. "It's what you did." There was a confused silence on the other end of the line. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "I'm talking about Eliza," I said. The name dropped into the conversation like a stone. "You remember your aunt, don't you? She's been going over some old family papers and it turns out she'd like her house back, and her money, and the last 40 years of her life." I hung up the phone before she could respond, leaving her in the ringing silence with the ghost she thought she had buried forever. The war was no longer quiet. The silence that must have followed that phone call in my parents' multi-million-dollar home is something I'll always savor. The sound of their world grinding to a halt. The name Eliza, unspoken for decades, now resurrected and armed with the power to destroy them. I imagined my mother's face, white with shock, and my father's carefully constructed composure, shattering into a million pieces. They had buried their secret under a mountain of money and lies, and a single phone call had excavated it. Their abstract fears soon became a concrete reality. The next day, Mr. Croft dispatched a process server to their manicured doorstep. In front of their gossiping neighbors, my parents and my brother Daniel were each served with a thick, heavy legal packet. The summons, the petition for quiet title on Blackwood Manor, the preliminary statement for the civil suit, outlining charges of fraud, conspiracy, theft of inheritance, and 40 years of false imprisonment. Daniel, the golden child whose hands were technically clean, was named as a party for knowingly benefiting from the proceeds of a crime. His perfect future was now tied to their monstrous past.
As expected, my father called. His voice was a low growl, a desperate attempt to reclaim the authority he had always held over me. "Mark, you will stop this. You will stop this right now," he commanded. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're being manipulated by a delusional old woman. She's sick. She has always been sick. You are destroying this family over the fantasies of a madwoman." I listened patiently, with Eliza standing right beside me, her posture regal. "Is the original copy of great-grandfather's will a fantasy?" I asked coolly. "The one that leaves this manor and 1/3 of the company to Eliza? Are the secret ledgers detailing the exact amounts grandfather embezzled a fantasy? Is the signed notarized confession from Dr. Finch admitting he was bribed to declare her insane also a fantasy? We have it all, Dad. Every lie you built your life on, we have the truth on paper." The silence on the other end of the line was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The blustering authority was gone, replaced by the hollow sound of a man who knew he was trapped. "Mr. Croft is preparing a settlement offer," I continued, my voice like ice. "It is non-negotiable. You will sign over your house, your cars, your investment portfolios, and all remaining company shares to a trust in Eliza's name. You will cede all claims to this manor. You will fund a public apology in 3 major newspapers. In exchange, Eliza will consider not pressing the criminal charges for kidnapping, which carry a life sentence. You have until noon tomorrow to accept. Otherwise, we file the lawsuit publicly, and the whole world will know what you are." I hung up the phone. Eliza placed a steady hand on my arm. A thin, cold smile touched her lips. "Well done," she said. "Let them sit with their terror. It's a meal they forced me to eat for a very long time." The morning of the deadline was bright and clear. Eliza and I sat in the restored sunroom, drinking tea as if it were any other day. We didn't speak of the deadline. We didn't need to. After a lifetime of being powerless, we were learning to enjoy the quiet hum of control. We were simply waiting for the world to catch up to the verdict we had already passed down. At 11 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice, usually so full of arrogant confidence, was thin and cracking with desperation. Mark, please, you can't do this," he pleaded. "My whole life is just starting. My career, my engagement. You're going to ruin everything over something that happened before either of us was born. It didn't happen before I was born, I corrected him calmly. It was still happening yesterday. It was happening every single day I spent alone in this house, and every single day Eliza spent locked away. Okay, I get it, he said, his voice rising. But what do you want? Is it money? I can get you money. Tell me the number you want to make this all go away. We can settle this, just us. You and me, brothers. The word brothers was so absurd, so insulting, that I almost laughed. The money you would get me is Eliza's money, Daniel, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, flat tone. The tuition for your Ivy League education was paid for by the woman our family left to rot in a hidden room. The down payment on your condo, the car you drive, the ring on your fiancé's finger, it was all purchased with the proceeds of a 40-year-long crime. You aren't an innocent party. You are the sole beneficiary. I leaned into the phone. You spent 20 years looking down on me, the family failure. You never once called to see if I was even alive out here. So don't you dare talk to me about being brothers. Your perfect life was built on our suffering. Now it's time to pay the bill. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It's 11:50. Your parents' lawyer has 10 minutes to call Mr. Croft and accept the surrender. If he doesn't, my next call is to your fiancé's father. I have his number right here. I'm sure he'd be fascinated to hear the true story of his future in-laws. I hung up. The silence in the sunroom was profound. 10 minutes passed, then 15. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Mr. Crockett. It contained only 3 words. They have surrendered. Eliza closed her eyes and took a long, slow breath, releasing 40 years of darkness in a single exhale. It was done. The signing took place a week later in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom at Mr. Croft's firm. My family was already there when we arrived. They looked like strangers in their own expensive clothes. My father's face was sallow and sunken. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. And Daniel, he just looked hollowed out, a ghost haunted by a future that had been stolen from him overnight. They sat on one side of a massive mahogany table. Eliza and I sat on the other. We did not exchange a single word. The only sound in the room for the next hour was the quiet rustle of paper and the scratch of my father's pen. He signed away the company his father had built on theft. He signed away the deed to their mansion. He signed away his stock portfolio, his art collection, his cars. My mother signed away her jewelry and her personal accounts. Daniel signed away the trust fund that had been set up for him, its contents now transferred back to the estate he was never truly entitled to. Finally, they each signed the public apology, a meticulously crafted document detailing their unconscionable actions against Eliza Vance. It was a slow, methodical execution of their entire existence. When the last document was signed and notarized, Mr. Croft gathered the papers into a neat stack. My family stood up, their movements stiff and clumsy. They had nothing left but the clothes on their backs and a small court-mandated living stipend that would barely cover the rent on a tiny apartment. As they turned to leave, my mother stopped and looked at me, her face a mask of pure hatred. "I hope this makes you happy," she spat. "You have nothing now either. You're still just the caretaker of this worthless old house." I stood up and looked her directly in the eye for the first time. "You still don't understand," I said, and my voice was not angry, but filled with a strange kind of pity. "You think this was about money. You think this was about getting something for myself. But you're wrong. I didn't destroy you. Your own actions did. This is just the consequence." I gestured toward Eliza, who watched them with the serene calm of a judge who has passed sentence. "We were left with nothing but this house, and we built a life. You have been left with nothing but your character, and I suspect you will find it's not enough to survive. This wasn't revenge, it was a reckoning." They left without another word. The next week, their apology ran on a full page in 3 national newspapers. Their friends abandoned them. Their social world evaporated. They disappeared into the obscurity they had sentenced us to. Today, Blackwood Manor is no longer dark. The sun streams through the clean windows, and the gardens are bursting with life. Eliza, with the help of the best doctors her own money can now buy, is rediscovering a world that was stolen from her. She has reconnected with the grandchildren of her old friends, telling them the story the world was never allowed to hear. And me, I am no longer a caretaker or a scapegoat. I manage the Vance Trust, a charitable foundation we established to advocate for victims of familial injustice and wrongful institutionalization. The fortune that was built on one person's suffering is now used to heal the suffering of many. The cycle is broken. The house is finally at peace.